This happened in 2009. I was 24 and worked as an office manager in one of the sub-companies of a big architecture and design consortium. We had regular staff in the office and more designers and engineers working on the various construction sites the company was building, so they would only come to the office at the end of the workday or around paycheck time. Besides my other duties, I was also in charge of their work schedule, so naturally when they would come, it would be me who they'd interact with most often. Most of the engineers were a bunch of middle-aged seasoned men, with a bit of a raunchy sense of humor, but harmless nonetheless. Then there was this new guy, Boris, who transferred from another city. He was in his 50s and different than the rest, but looked rather well kept for someone his age, kind of dignified and very well mannered. He was a dead ringer for the actor Sam Elliott, which instilled even more of a respectful attitude towards him. The man was extremely polite, his jokes were not cynical, and on top of that he recently became a grandfather, as his son had a baby daughter. He was also very proud and happy about it, and would always talk about her and show pictures every time he visited the office. Everyone liked him, and I felt safest around him, because he never made me feel like a piece of meat, unlike his colleagues. The project he was appointed to had foreign investors, so on the site worked an interpreter in her 30s. Her name was Vera. She was very friendly too, and even though we didn't often get to see each other in person like with the rest of the office colleagues, we would always be joking around whenever we had any interactions over the phone or via email. Before the official Christmas party, one evening the engineers came around closing time and Vera was with them. It was one of those casual and relaxed times in the office, not only because it was the end of shift, but with the holidays being near, it created that chill, friendly atmosphere. Boris was especially excited and suggested we go for drinks in some pub nearby, because spontaneous gatherings like that don't often happen, then there's no better time than now. Despite his convincing arguments, everyone else was busy and declined, but I felt bad for him because I knew he was alone, as his family was back in his hometown. So, in the end, it was just me, Vera, and him. It was snowing heavily outside, and we ended up in a rather dingy-looking pub close to the office building. Initially, the evening was fun. We laughed a lot, discussing some work-related events and sipping red wine. However, as it progressed, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable, because Boris, whom up till now I thought of as a father figure, usually so well-mannered and respectful, was giving off a very different vibe now. He was decidedly flirty the more he drank, the more aggressively he expressed it. What started with him staring at me with a rather predatory grin in his eye, and giving me compliment after compliment completely out of context, progressed into him somehow turning every conversation into a sexual innuendo, and a way to show me how attractive he finds me, asking me questions about my personal life. I said I wanted to leave and stood up, starting to gather my things, when he playfully took my hand, but squeezed it so hard that my rings bit into my skin and it hurt me. He was trying to convince me to stay, and when it didn't work, they both decided to leave with me. Once we were out and started walking, the Christmas lights, decorations, and the streets bustling with people helped him convince us to go to one more pub just for a while longer, because the night was young, and it was not often that we all got to go out for drinks with colleagues. I should have listened to my gut and refused. But instead I let myself be convinced and agreed with a plastered friendly smile on my face, because back then I was so out of my element in this situation. I didn't really know how to react. I was afraid of direct confrontation and frankly uncomfortable and ashamed. The second pub was even darker than the first. We picked a table on the second floor near the terrace, looking onto the first. There was nobody around. He sat across from me this time, and he had no qualms to openly stare down my chest, even though I remember I was still wearing my work clothes, which are rather conservative. I was biding my time, hoping we could leave soon, and at least calm that I was not alone. Because Vera was there too. Although she was kind of tipsy and giggly and seemed oblivious to my discomfort at his constant hints and innuendos. Then she got up and went to the restroom. Boy, did I cringe hard then. My whole body tensed when he suddenly stood up and sat next to me, put his arm at the back of my chair and told me in a lustful voice, "Come to my place tonight. I want you so badly." I almost dropped my wine glass. I froze, feeling trapped, because I was between the wall and him. I didn't know how to react. I didn't have the guts to be flat out rude to him, so instead, I nervously giggled and said, "Oh, well, I'm flattered, but I can't do that." He seemed to take it as me merely playing hard to get, so he upped the ante and caressed my hair, leaning even closer, whispering to me, "Come, I promise to make you feel incredibly good. I know how to please a beautiful girl like you," and then licked his lips suggestively. I almost puked. I tried to gently push him away from me, but he didn't move until Vera came back from the restroom, in what felt like hours later. But it was probably a mere 5 minutes. When I saw her, I felt both relieved, yet also ashamed because of what she would think when she saw him so intimately close to me in her absence. I suddenly jumped up so quickly, I pushed my wine glass and spilled the rest of it on the tablecloth. I declared I wanted to go home and didn't care if they were ready or not. They protested, but in the end agreed to go with me, because it was late and I wouldn't be alone outside. Frankly, I just wanted to get as far away from him as possible. But there he was, acting like nothing happened, helping me with my coat like the perfect gentleman, without me being able to protest, as he was the first to the coat rack. And when I had my coat on, once again he used the moment to lean into my ear from behind and whisper, "Come, please come with me. I'm hard for you all evening," and pressed himself enough for me to feel proof of his words. I started climbing down the stairs, and the chilly winter air felt like a relief. There were no taxis in sight, so I was forced to walk to the bus stop with the two of them, her chattering obliviously on the other side of me, and him constantly pulling at my hand or touching me, trying to get my attention and mouth, "Come with me," secretly, if I looked at him. When we reached the bus stop, the bus that came first was that of Vera, so it meant I would have to remain alone with him. Instead, I decided to catch the bus and then get off at the next stop and call a taxi. He didn't expect me to go with her though, so he made one last attempt to grab my hand and make me stay, but I pulled it away and got on the bus. When the doors closed, I started shaking and felt like crying. I told Vera what happened, but to my dismay she was rather dismissive, saying that he's a good-looking man for his age and I could have had a bit of fun. Then she admitted that he was always talking about me, and all the other engineers at the construction site were aware of his crush on me. They were even teasing him about it. She said that he actually wanted to organize such an evening of going out as a pretext to get me alone at some point and try his luck. I felt disgusted. Even more disgusted when the text messages started. He professed his obsession with me. He was pleading with me to agree to at least meet him one-on-one for drinks, and that he didn't want to scare me. This lasted a week or so before I realized I could just block his number, although I was dreading the inevitable next time we would meet in the office. I confided in another colleague from the office, who also happened to be the niece of the big boss, and this time I was taken seriously, especially after I showed her the messages. I didn't see him the whole week. Then after the holidays, I learnt he'd gone back to his hometown. Not sure what exactly happened, and whether or not he quit or was sacked. But to my relief, I'm glad I never saw or heard from him again. Last night, I was coming home from dinner out with a friend who I haven't seen in a while. It was pitch black out, and around 9:40 p.m. when I was finally driving home. I had not been drinking or smoking or anything like that at all. I really wanted to avoid a particular highway because I hit a deer on this highway back in January. The setup is two-way one lane in both direction. Well, as I'm getting pretty close to home, maybe about 3 miles out from my house, I have to make a left turn. And at this point, there's 2 left turn lanes that merge into one lane again shortly after you turn. I was the first car in the right lane to turn, and car X was the second vehicle in the leftmost turn lane. As we finally get into the green light, I'm going kind of slow, as I'd been up since 2 a.m. And I, as the first car of the leftmost lane, gets in front during the merge. As I begin to merge over, I see the very front of car X, a giant white Bronco-type vehicle, attempting to overtake me. The problem with this is the front end of their vehicle is only by the gas cap on the end of mine, so they can't overtake me without hitting me. So I speed up a little to successfully make my merge, and they do a big swerve to the left, then another full swerve to the right. I slowed down to see if they're okay or if we made contact, but I didn't feel any contact, and when I looked at my car later, I had no damage. They immediately start speeding up and turn their brights on and start tailgating me. So I'm trying to play it cool and disengage from road rage, and continue driving normally until we reach the next light where it splits into 2 lanes again. I go into the right lane and they stay in the left lane, and I ended up going around another vehicle and getting in front of them so that there's a buffer between us now. The lanes merge again immediately after this light, and then I make a right turn off the street. Now I'm in the main road in traffic in downtown, and going kind of slow again. I've calmed down thinking I've gotten away from whoever angry car X was, so I turn back onto the 1-lane road to continue going home, and see that car X parked in the closed gas station. I actually didn't notice the car at all. I totally forgot about it and was just ready to go to bed. Then, as I get to my neighborhood, this car pulls up behind me, tailgating me again, but with their brights on. I wasn't sure what to do as I'd never been in this situation before, so I kept making turns on random streets in my neighborhood, and I never went into the real part of the neighborhood I live in. After 2 turns, I have confirmed that they are in fact following me, so I pull over and roll my window down. If they have something to say or want to file a report or get the police involved or whatever, let's just do this, because I want to go home and sleep. I think they'll pull up and curse me out or say whatever. But no, they sped past me and pull into a driveway as if they live there. Weird. So I sit there for 30 seconds because I'm not sure how to handle this. Is it all in my head? Were they just going home and are annoyed at me? Should I call the cops? What would I even be reporting? That nothing happened but I'm scared? So I drive off, and in my rearview mirror see them turn their lights back on and make a U-turn. Now I know full well they were following me. I actually made a U-turn because I wanted to get their plates. I couldn't know if they were behind me because they had their brights on. They ended up parking at a separate house on the other side of the street and opened the garage. I know they actually lived there. At this point, I'm pretty pissed off at the lengths this person went to just potentially follow me home. And for what? For me merging into a lane? How petty. I actually kept driving in the neighborhood. My gut told me not to go home, and I hate going home angry. My family can always sense it. As I'm driving, I opted to go to a 7-Eleven on the corner. I parked there and started doing breathing exercises. It was now 10:15 p.m. I noticed a silver car that was previously parked on the street where Car X is garaged and had two skinny-looking teenagers who appeared to be looking for coins. One of them eventually goes to the 7-Eleven to buy something, so I think I'm just being paranoid and ignore the vehicle. However, on the corner I see another white vehicle. This one is a Jeep Compass, and they're sitting there stopped in the middle of the road, and there's no traffic in town. At this point, it's just a car sitting on the road, and it's really creepy. I've never been one to shy, so I turn my car back on and get on the road. I'm heading to Planet Fitness since they're 24 hours and there should be a lot of people there. And the white and silver cars start following me. Whenever I would pull into a parking lot, they would just circle but never come in. I don't know why I wasn't smart enough to call the cops, but I wasn't. Hindsight is 2020. Then after sitting there for 5 to 10 minutes, and I didn't see either car, I take off again, now heading to a different highway. And I realized after driving that I'm trapped between the white car in front of me and the silver car is 3 car lengths behind me. The white car pulls off into an apartment complex and just sits. So I pulled into the next one, roll my window down and ask, "Why are you following me?" I took pictures of her face, license plate and vehicle, and have some video of her following me around. She never makes eye contact with me or rolls her window down. She backs out and peels down the road, and then I see the silver car take off. At this point I follow because I want photos of the silver car too, in case I do end up going to the police. They both separate and try to lose me, but I know where they live because I know where this other car is garaged. So I head back to the area and see them both parked there, so I start taking pictures of the silver car and the young couple. I ask the teenage kids, "Why are you following me around?" "We aren't following you, you're following us. Why you take our pictures, mate?" To that I respond, "My husband is a state sheriff, and I'm gonna let him know you people are harassing me." This is a lie. I'm not married, but I panicked and didn't know what else to say. "We're not harassing you. We're at home. You should go home too." And then they went inside. This address was clearly having a party. Lots of cars in their driveway and on the street. I'm too wound up to drive home again, so I decide to do 2 more laps around the neighborhood to calm down. It's 10:45 now. I finally calm down and drive around town to the end of the neighborhood I live in. That's when I notice a burgundy crossover that could possibly be following me. At this point, I think there's no way they got a third person to do this, so I'm just driving normal but watch them from behind. Everywhere I go, they go. So I pull into the driveway of a house for sale and sit and turn my lights off and put my car in echo mode so you can't hear it running. They're just sitting down the street watching me. Then they take off. And where do they end up parking? Where the original car is garaged. So I get more pictures of this house and all of the cars and license plates. I do 3 or 4 more laps around the town, and not just my neighborhood. At this point it's 11. I'm not calm, I'm paranoid, and I don't see any of the vehicles following anymore, but I can't be sure. So I do one last drive to see if all the cars are still at the original house. And they all are, to which point I finally go home. No cars passed my house last night, and I stayed up till 3 a.m. just watching and waiting. Am I crazy? Paranoid? I'm just trying to make sense of all this shady stuff. This was 2 to 3 years ago in India, and my father and I were driving home from a wedding. I don't know how much you all know about weddings over here, but this was a 3-day event that involved the entirety of 2 middle-of-nowhere nothing villages. It was a huge deal, and we were the only white people the majority of these folks had ever seen. So beyond the bride and grooms themselves, We were the best guests. This meant near constant attention. No relaxation or any time to ourselves, and sleep came in the form of a concrete slab of a bed with a thin blanket over it, nestled snugly in between apparently every drunk uncle the village could hold, all passionately arguing for hours about something in Hindi. I think it was maybe the music which also constantly blared from the concert-sized speakers through the whole village. It was safe to say by the time we left the wedding, we were already extremely sleep-deprived and out of it. This isn't even the fun part though. Through an odd chain of events that isn't totally related to this story, while driving home on the single-lane road that had traffic in both directions, dodging donkey carts, groups of scooters, and other drivers at 120 kilometers per hour, we get in a head-on collision. I remember realizing what was going to happen a few seconds before it did, closing my eyes, loosening my body, and making sure my tongue would be okay. And then bam, the world turned upside down, and again and once more. Our car flipped 4 times, landing down in an overgrown field near the spot of the accident. The other car was mostly gone, and what was left of it was still on the road. Glass everywhere. My dad was unconscious, my clothes ripped to shreds, and there were voices all around me. I remember being extremely confused and dazed, and I heard. Why did I hurt? Dozens of people had apparently stopped to flip the car back over to help the American tourist out. A few people pulled me out through the left-hand broken window and immediately went back in to help my father on the driver's side. I, extremely confused, exhausted, and scared, and most likely concussed, which I later found out is definitely concussed, wandered over to the road and the other demolished car. I could hear a siren in the distance. An ambulance? The cops? I didn't pay attention. Where were my shoes? Suddenly a man had his arms around my shoulders, and I was ushered into an unknown white car a small distance away from the wreck. "I will take you to the hospital," he said. "Where's my father?" He ignored me. "He is fine, come on." He pushed me forward, and in a daze I followed, asking about my things, my shoes and my dad. All I had was my phone, which was still in a death grip in my hand. He ignored me. "Do not worry, hurry, get in the car." I did as I was told, though I remember asking a few more times about my shoes. I was limping barefoot. I remember being forced on my right foot. How it wouldn't work, basically ignoring the guy guiding me away from the accident and the rest of the people. Why did it hurt so much, and where was my bag? The man urged me forward some more, making promises that my things were fine and that he had them already and just to get into the car. I was barely paying attention, slowly moving forward. Where was my dad? At that point, I guess, the man decided I wasn't moving fast enough. He wrenched my phone from my hand, maneuvered me into the back seat and slammed the door behind me. He was walking around the driver's side when an ambulance pulled up. I struggled with the door, saying I'll get the ambulance instead. But my dad must be there, and where are my things? "No!" He slammed the door again, locking it this time. "Be quiet." At this point I started crying, and was still confusedly trying to open the locked door, blubbering that I needed my things. He insisted he was helping me out, and to shut up. He rushed around, opened the driver's side door, and was about to get in, when I heard an almost roar-like sound erupt to my left. Suddenly my father was there, bleeding, limping, ignoring the chaos, and angrier than I'd ever seen him. "Get my daughter out of your car." He grabbed the man who was halfway in the vehicle at that point and threw him to the ground, unlocked the back seat door and rushed around to pull me out. "Dad, where are my shoes? Does he still have my phone?" I obviously asked to thin air, as my dad was already back a few feet away shouting, hands around the man's throat demanding my phone. With a terrified look, the man pulled it out his pocket and threw it several feet away, causing my dad to drop him onto the pavement in one swift motion and bound after the device. After that point, the man hurriedly climbed into his car and sped away, while I made my way back to the waiting ambulance, still not ready processing what just happened. My dad materialized on the bench next to me a few seconds later, my cracked phone in hand, and enveloped me in a hug while saying how scared he was. The paramedics moving all around us, securing everything and preparing for the drive to the hospital. Everything after that is a story for another time. But to the random Indian man who most likely tried to take me from my parents at the scene of an accident, let's never meet again. A number of years back, me and my friends were doing the great US road trip. We had covered several states and nearly run out of money, but were determined to do as much as we could on our limited budget. There was a campsite about 40 miles away that we were heading to for the night. We weren't going to use tents, but instead sleep in our car, as we'd gotten used to it and it was quite comfortable. As we were driving, we see someone on the road behind us, a dark car with tinted windows. It was twilight, and we could just about make out their car and these windows before the darkness truly set in. I wasn't worried at first, but as we were driving now on more rural roads, these people were following us, and I was starting to get nervous. It seemed that after every turn I took, these people would be following. So my friend said that we should test it out. He told me to turn left onto a road that wasn't where we were going. It's fine, the GPS would reroute. So we turned left and he followed. Then we turned left again and he followed. We turned left 2 more times, almost to make a perfect square and get back on the road that we were originally on before. There's no way anyone would do this. This is just lots of unnecessary detours. And after the 4th one, I was convinced. I started freaking out. My friend called the police immediately, but they said they wouldn't be able to get out to us that quickly, and suggested that as we were passing county lines, to try and get in contact with the other station, and that they should be able to sort it. Useless cretins. So my friend tried doing that, while I was focusing on this driver. It was getting to the point where he was speeding up and trying to hit our rental vehicle with his. Not only was I freaked out for our safety, but if there was a scratch on this thing, I wouldn't be getting my deposit back. And as a very poor student at the time, that concerned me almost equally as my life. Sad, I know. Thus is the case though. We carried on driving in the dark and in the woods for what felt like ages, but couldn't have been more than about 10 minutes, when I made a rash decision to do a last-minute turn. I didn't even put my blinkers on and just threw myself into this left-hand lane. He didn't notice in time and kept on going, much to my relief. I knew it couldn't be long before he started tailgating us again, so I tried going fast, desperately looking for somewhere to hide the car on another side street. We kept on driving quickly until we saw an old farmhouse. They had a dirt road leading to their driveway, so I quickly sped up into there and quickly found myself near a barn. I parked right next to the barn and waited, turned off all the lights of the car, and in the dark we all turned our heads, because from this angle we should be able to see the car drive by, as there was a fair amount of foliage protecting us, so we had the better advantage when it came to sight. As time went by, nothing happened, and after about 10 minutes of us not seeing anything, we were just about to leave when my friend said, "Wait another minute." And exactly as he breathed those words, did a car come out the darkness with its lights on. It was no longer going at a high speed, but crawling through the streets incredibly slowly, scanning with its lights. We all stayed there, in the car hidden wide-eyed, waiting to see if they would find us. They drove on, but there was a fleeting moment when we thought that we were caught, and it was here that we had nowhere to run to. Thankfully, they left, and after about 20 minutes of just breathing deeply and trying to calm down, did I turn on the engine and drive away again. I don't know what their intentions were, but it certainly freaked us out. We arrived to the campsite and hardly slept that night. So to the creeps trying to follow us in the middle of the night, let's not meet again. This happened roughly 3 years ago, when I was working for a small non-profit for mental health in Little Rock. I no longer work there, so I feel more comfortable sharing this, and honestly, sharing this was quite cathartic, so here it goes. Our organization is statewide, but our HQ was quite small. At the time, there were only 3 of us working at that office. When this all went down, only my boss and I were in. We were already quite stressed out, because we had learned just days earlier that a recently fired board member had been stalking my boss. She doesn't get scared easily, as our job had us interacting with people who have done some seriously disturbing things, but this sufficiently creeped her out, so I was hyperprotective, definitely to a fault. Luckily, I had my work cut out for me, as the whole building and complex had cameras at every angle that our landlord checked regularly. It was around 2 in the afternoon, and the day had slowed down considerably. I took the opportunity to clean my office, since I could never keep it organized for long. Once I'd filled up 2 massive trash bags worth of junk and old papers, I decided to step outside and make the short walk to take the trash out. When I say our organization is tiny, I'm talking we take out our own trash and clean up our entire building up. Tiny. I knew what my boss's stalker looked like, and was fully prepared to deal with him should he be on the premises. Our front door was kept locked, and I locked it back up as soon as I stepped outside. My head was on a swivel. If I could have turned my head like an owl, I undoubtedly would have. I knew I could mop the floor with this guy should he try anything, but I wasn't about to go searching for him. Looking out for my boss was my goal. On the way back to the office, I was happy to see only employees from the other offices outside. I turned the left corner towards my office door, unlocked it and stepped inside, but before I could close the door, someone was directly behind me, and said with impatience, "I'm here to get Michael." "Where's Michael?" He said it so fast I didn't immediately register what he'd just said. I'd actually jumped out in shock. How the hell did the man get behind me so quickly? All the cars in the parking lot were our cars, and my spidey senses were flaring up. I'm 6 foot tall, and this man was right up there with me in height. He looked super thin, which is a lot coming from me, but he looked intense, frustrated. It was the beginning of fall, and he had a big jacket on, and a do-rag, clothing one rarely wears when it's still 80 degrees outside. He gave no regard for personal space, so I had to back away from him, causing him to come even further inside. Noticing this, I stood my ground. I told him that nobody named Michael works here, and that we're not a service provider, and that was clearly the last thing he wanted to hear, because it only pissed him off. He raised his voice. "I know one of you has Michael. Where the hell is he?" All I could say to him is that I had no idea who Michael was, and I asked him if he was lost, how old he was, and what Michael looked like. But none of these questions received a reply. "I was just over there," pointing to another facility just a stone's throw to the east, "and they told me the same thing. I know he's here. Why are you giving me all these lies?" The man was enraged. My efforts to calm him down were ineffective at best, and I started getting frustrated myself, but that feeling quickly turned to concern when I saw the grip of a handgun sticking out his jacket pocket. Everything clicked. I finally understood what I was 90% sure I was dealing with. It also hit me that I was trapped. He was standing in the way of our exit. My boss could have exited through the back door, but she was in her office and didn't know what was going on. I wasn't about to make a mad dash to the exit and leave her. My only option was to fight back. If it came down to that, I took a few steps towards the guy, ready to crash into his hand if he made a motion to draw. I disarmed plenty of rubber and unloaded guns, but the fear of permanent damage and/or death puts a lot into perspective. Finally, my boss stepped out of her office to see what was going on. I honestly don't remember what the man was shouting after I saw the gun, but he had not calmed down, and I was too laser focused on his right arm. My boss was met with the same responses and roadblocks I'd gotten regarding this Michael fellow. Despite all the stuff that had been going on with her former board member stalking her, and whether or not she'd seen the gun too, my boss made the ballsiest decision I think I've ever seen. To say I'm thankful we were in sync to make this work is putting it mildly. Displaying complete control and confidence, my boss told the man, "I think you might be looking for the Delaware facility, just down here and to the left. I'm sorry you were given bad directions, but it's in this complex. Let me walk you over there now," and walk him out the door and to said facility. She did. As soon as they were out the door, I knew what to do. I called the facility and warned them that my boss, who they knew well, was walking a man over to their facility, and he was armed looking for someone named Michael. Given that this facility serves a lot of patients under the Act 911, there's almost always at least one police officer there. When I saw the gun in his jacket, I came to the conclusion that this was an attempted hit on Michael. Gang activity has plagued Little Rock since the 90s, and at one point, it had the most murder per capita in the US. During the early 2000s, it calmed down considerably, but within the past 5 or so years, gang violence has resurged in the city. Furthermore, I've had prior experience in Kansas with gang violence, when a hitman came into our middle school to kill the son of a rival gang member, in broad daylight. Fortunately, he never made it inside. That means in both instances, this was meant to be a message to the other gangs. He wasn't hiding his face, he had no backup, and his face was on all the cameras. I'd guessed he'd already made plans to go to prison and thrive there, but I don't know enough about gang life to say for certain what his follow-up was going to be. But what had me terrified at the moment was that my boss was right in the middle of the danger. I panicked after calling the facility and stayed in the office. I'm kind of ashamed I did that. My boss returned not long after. She didn't tell me anything new, only that she had led him there and thanked me for calling them. She hadn't seen the gun in his jacket, but she knew something wasn't right about him when she got a good look at him from our office. She said she went mother hen mode by leading the danger away from her coop. He clearly had been given bad directions, which was mildly amusing. To be fair, just to do a Google Maps search of that road shows a misleading display of everything on that small street. To the left of our office, there are roughly 40 yards of trees that separate our complex from the facility. So I guess he was just coming out of the tree line as I was unlocking the door, because I did not see him coming. My boss didn't tell me about anything new the next day, and I'd checked Police Beat for weeks to see if anything was written about it. Thankfully, I didn't find anything in Police Beat, which means no one was harmed. However, we later worked with and trained LEOs in crisis intervention, and they would sometimes give us inside info, like where was or wasn't safe, where gang activity was increasing. One lieutenant I worked with a lot eventually confirmed that the man was in fact trying to kill Michael over gang disputes. I don't know what his relation was to the would-be hitman beyond that, especially why a mental health patient was a target. But hey, we may have saved someone's life. I did have some theories. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the story, and please, stay out of gangs, ladies and gentlemen. It was sometime in the late 90s. I was a young man, and the internet was still new territory. In search of great love, I turned to the AOL chat rooms. They were a treasure trove. Here you could talk to women without first having to visually convince them. And what was even better, you could impress them with polished sentences, clever or witty statements, and if I found one thing easy, it was the written word. So many things happened. I was visiting complete strangers almost every night in another city. Unfortunately, these meetings meant that I spent several hundred kilometers and many hours every weekend on the highway, because only in the rarest cases was the date in the immediate vicinity. The internet knows neither borders nor distances. It happened that on this special weekend, I once again covered endless kilometers on a German motorway, only to meet a very likable chat acquaintance in real life. You will all know that for sure. After some time in the car, you think about nothing special. You sing along to the radio, and you beat up the poor steering wheel with bumping drums. You are the long-distance flow. The kilometers pull past. One exit is like another. The rest stops are indistinguishable, and you overtake hundreds of trucks, and you witness the tank needle as it moves to the E to the fuel gauge like an unstoppable snail. Then the unlikely happened. I was driving through a construction site. The lanes were now severely narrowed. 60 kilometers an hour was the top speed, and I drove maybe 5 kilometers over the speed limit. Then the big 8-tonner which was next to me, which I comfortably passed. One of his tires was almost as tall as my complete Volkswagen Beetle. I was just the height of the cab. With an incredibly loud bang and a veritable explosion, the front tire next to me shattered off this lorry. Rubber parts flew on my front and side windows, and a kind of foggy smoke enveloped my car as almost 100 psi made their way out of their prison. I thought that in a few moments the realization of my imminent death manifested in my head. My co-driver put his hand on my shoulder and said in a sonorous and gentle voice, "Stay calm." I felt a warm, comforting feel settle over my chest from my shoulder, and I concentrated on keeping the car straight and on the narrowed lane. Neither the sight boundary nor the truck to touch, and indeed the fog went away. The last little black rubber part was flown off my bonnet, and I could see the road again. In the rearview mirror, I saw the truck bringing his cart to a halt, and I too ran to the right and set my engine down with trembling hands. With a thick lump in my throat and suffocating voice, I stuttered a thank you to my passenger, as the realization ran down my back in an icy chill that I was alone in the car. I glanced at the passenger seat, confirmed that it was empty, and suddenly, that made everything seem totally surreal. There was a knock on my disc, and the question, "Are you okay?" brought me back to reality. To this day, I have not told this story to anyone as it happened. I always skip the part about the passenger, but I can't describe how big a relief it is to share it with all of you. A few years ago, I was 17, just graduated high school, and got my first job at a Christian camp near Yosemite in California over the summer. Mainly the people I worked with were great, really sweet Christian college kids. The good kinds. There was one guy though, Carl, who I frankly did not like. Carl was tall, handsome, and charming. He had curly golden brown hair and a smile that could stop your heart. His eyes, though, were dead. He never got those little crinkles around the corner of his eyes when he smiled. It was like the top half of his face was just dead. There were things I didn't like about Carl right off the bat. His eyes for one, that dead smile of his. He also never asked for anything. He tried to twist your arm. He just very softly, very slowly tried to manipulate the situation, until you almost felt like you owed him. Each time, it felt like a part of my brain shut down, like it slammed a door shut, and there was a very clear feeling of, no, this is not right. Save him some food, but do not walk out into the woods to give it to him. Something is wrong. I got along with most of the little cliques at camp. No one really disliked each other as far as I knew. We just kind of broke off into groups based on what we liked to do in our free time or who we worked with the most. Carl, though, seemed to make friends on a one-to-one within a clique. By the time he left the group, it was decimated. They were fighting, not speaking, and didn't trust each other. I know this isn't a lot of evidence, but I'm just trying to paint a picture of what a type of man he was. One day, everyone in camp wanted to go to Fresno. We were tired of camp food and wanted real dinner, maybe see a movie or go bowling. I was off work last. Now at camp we had a sign-out sheet. Being so close to Yosemite, we often went hiking. So if we left, we had to put our name down, along with where we were going, when we left, and when we should be expected back. This way, if something happened, they would know when to start looking for us. So I put in all my info on the sheet and headed down to the parking lot. My friends had all divided up into their cars. I didn't drive and jokingly asked if they'd forgotten about me. They said Carl had said I could ride with him. I looked around and didn't see him, although I had seen his name on the sign sheet. All the hair on my body stood on end. I was terrified to get into the car with this guy, alone. He felt so wrong, so off, just not right. I don't know how else to put it. My friends were telling me I had nothing to be worried about and it would be fine. I saw Carl walking to the parking lot, that dead smile on his face, and everything in me was screaming not to get into the car. I said that I was tired and wanted to stay in tonight, and Carl laid in the charm on thick, telling me what a good night it would be. I owed him because of God knows what, flashing that dead smirk. I refused. He got angry and told me I didn't need to be such a bitch about it, and I thought we were friends. Finally, everyone figured out that I wouldn't be persuaded. I hugged one of my girlfriends goodbye and whispered in her ear not to ride back with Carl under any circumstances. When they all left, I walked back to the area with the sign-out sheet to cross my name off, since obviously I wasn't going anywhere. I saw the sheet where my name was, and my heart dropped. My name had already been erased. This all starts when I began working at a grocery store in 2015. This one older man introduced himself early on to me, and I thought nothing of it. Eventually he started coming through my line every day and buying me various things. He would always tell me he was dying of cancer and thought of me as the son I never had. I never gave him any special treatment or even had long talks with him, but he seemed like he was going further and further each time. Eventually, every time he came through my line, he would ask me out to lunch, which I always came up with some excuse because I didn't feel comfortable about the whole situation. And this leads up to today, a year after I quit the job. He somehow found my new address and sent me a 2-page letter saying he just wants to talk and he misses me. Not sure what to do about this. On one hand, I feel bad for him and want to reach out, and on the other, I'm very creeped out how he found my address after all this time. What should I do? When I was 9, I went to a school that was in a village nestled in the English countryside. It was a small, quiet, close-knit community, where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was very cliquey actually, but anyway, it wasn't unusual for groups of children to roam around the village unaccompanied. Obviously, this is a no-no to most people nowadays, but this was the late 90s to early noughties, and in a village where literally the only big crimes in a 20-year period were an illegal rave in a barn and some guy setting his van on fire for the insurance money. Across the street from the front entrance of my school was a narrow dirt lane that turned into a bridleway at the end. It only had a few houses along it, and about halfway up was a park. It wasn't a weird park or anything. There was a playground and a large playing field around it, which backed onto farmland that stretched on for miles. I didn't have any friends at school until I was around 8, and the ones I did had known each other since they were infants, so I was kind of out of the loop. I had moved away from the village when I was 7 to another one about a 15-minute drive away, and my mum didn't know many of their parents as she wasn't from the area. She also liked to take me straight home after school rather than leave me to play with my friends in the village. If my mum drove all the way out to pick me up, she'd be annoyed to leave me and then have to come out again. This was also before everyone had a phone, so I never had any way of calling her either, as I was too shy to ask a friend if I could use their landline. However, I happened to live in a flat above one of my friends, who I often played with in the countryside surrounding our house. This occurrence took place on one of the few times I spent a longish period in the village outside of school, and of course it would be creepy. So it was my friend Lewis's 10th birthday, and he had a party I was invited to. We had the party with a few other kids, and then later on in the afternoon, most of them went home. After this, it was just me, my friend Hannah, my older brother who was also friends with Lewis, and I think 2 other kids from the village. We decided to go out and play. We went to the lake, the village hall, and around the churchyard, the World War II pillbox, and finally the park. It was a really fun day because we had literally no supervision at all. So there we were, playing army or something with sticks and toy guns, when suddenly my friends freeze and go silent. It stretched on for a few moments. I don't know why they had gone quiet, and I was asking what was going on, when suddenly they all started running into the trees. I had the urge to run with them, but despite being really confused, when we got there, we climbed up the trees and waited for quite a while. My friends looked out over the field to the area we'd just been playing in. Finally, Lewis and one of the other kids told me that the guy from the other week was back. He had been watching them from the park entrance. At first I couldn't see anything, but after a few moments of looking through the leaves, I saw this fat, bald, middle-aged guy who was wearing a white shirt standing at the edge of the main play area of the park, exactly where we'd just been playing. He was dressed like he'd just gotten off work or something, but he still looked really creepy even from a distance. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, just staring at us across the field for literally half-hour before he finally left. We calmed down a little and decided we should head home, as it was nearing sunset. I don't know if it was some kind of weird power trip for him or something, but it was certainly creepy, and I know we were right to run away. We returned to Lewis's house, taking the back way through the fields. Then after a while, my mum came to pick me, my brother, and Hannah up and take us home. It was really scary, but my friends didn't bother telling anyone about it. I don't think anything more happened with the guy after this, and my friends didn't speak of it again. However, it turned out that it wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and a while afterwards, I remembered something. About a week before this incident, I was in the lobby going up to the front door, and for some reason there were two police officers talking to my friend's mother at the entrance to their flat. I heard from my mum later on that Hannah's mother had called them after something weird had happened earlier that day. Apparently Hannah and a couple of kids from the village had been playing in the park after school when the creepy guy had shown up with a pair of really big, unfriendly dogs. He threatened to slit their throats or something to that effect and set the dogs loose on them. I'm not sure what breed they were, but apparently they were big and extremely aggressive. They chased my friends down, but they managed to flee to some trees lining the edge of the park and climbed up them to safety, and the guy and his dogs eventually left them alone. When they felt it was safe enough, they went to Lewis's house and explained to his mother what had happened. Lewis and Hannah's mother were really good friends who went way back, so she called Hannah and the other kid's mum to tell them what had happened. As far as I know, nothing much was done about it, which is weird to me considering this is a village that didn't have a big population. The police in my local area are kind of crap to say the least, but fortunately, we never encountered this weirdo again. This happened just a few weeks ago on a Friday. It was late at night around midnight. I had two friends in my car. We were coming back from a restaurant to celebrate finishing up the school play. I just dropped the first friend off and was now making the 4 or 5 mile drive to my second friend's house. It's a narrow road that cuts through some pretty dense woods. She was in the front seat, and we were listening to ballads and just talking about life. Not a big deal. I was behind a deep red pickup truck that had a motorcycle in the bed of it the entire way. I wasn't tailgating them, nothing, even though the driver was going a bit slow for my tastes and swerving around just a tad too much. When I'm just about to reach this intersection, that's not even a block from my second friend's house, this guy pulls over, seemingly for no reason. He just pulled over to the side of the road about a car or two lengths from the blinking red light. As I pass him to a stop up ahead, I see his face. He has a pretty generic face, nothing unusual, but he's staring right at us with anger in his eyes. The hairs on the back of my neck stand, and I just sense something isn't quite right. My friend looks out the window and says, "What is he doing?" Shakily, I look at my rearview mirror and see this guy is getting out of his seat, pulling a ski mask over his face and wielding a huge 10-inch knife in his hand. He started sprinting at my car, almost reaching the passenger side. I screamed and slammed on the gas, driving around for a while, the man only chasing my car for a few blocks until he knew he wasn't going to catch us. When I got back to the intersection minutes later to drop my friend off, he was gone. My friend ran inside, locked her doors and everything, and I sped away. But I was terrified. I told the police and filled out a report. I'm never driving that intersection again. I had a woodshop teacher that went out of his way to be the cool guy. He would let us pretty much do anything we wanted in class, would even let us go out the side door to smoke if we wanted, and would come up to us guys and make sexual comments about female students. One time I remember him coming over to me and some other dudes with an open can of shellac, it's white and sticky, and saying, "Hey fellas, you know you got a good chick when she takes a load like this." He then laughed, looked at a really attractive girl in class and said, "Bet she does." We all kinda nervously chuckled and let out a big, "What?" and walked away. Years after I graduated, I actually worked with him for a short time, and he was still creepy as ever. I just found an article saying he was arrested last year for inappropriately touching 3 female students and providing male students with drugs and alcohol. What an awful teacher. I am more often than not mistaken for being much younger than I really am, especially in my late 20s. and early 30s. I was frequently told by people that they thought I was about 10 years younger. I constantly had experiences where I was talked down to or inappropriately hit on. People also often tried to take advantage of me, not only because I was female, but because they perceived my age as much younger than I really was. Here's the story. My boyfriend and I were going shopping, and we walked into a dollar store. I hate to shop, and boyfriend likes to look at everything, so I usually go and gather all of our stuff while he putters around. I know, I also play video games and he does not. He cooks, I don't. Basically, he's the chick, I'm the dude. We split up, do our individual shopping, and this dapper little old man, probably in his late 60s, early 70s, comes up to me and holds out his arm like he expects me to take it. "Come on," he says. At first, this doesn't set off any alarm bells because he looks pretty harmless. Well-groomed, clean suit, decorative cane, even a jaunty little bowler hat with a feather in the brim. I figured he was a little confused and was mistaking me for either a store employee or family member. So I let him talk to me a little about the weather and such, and just when I'm about to make an excuse and be on my way, he holds out his arm and goes, "Come on," again. "I'm sorry? I think you have me confused with someone else. Are you looking for someone?" He starts chatting again, and during this chat he asks me if I have a job. All the while, he's slowly and subtly gravitating to the front of the store. I'm a little thick sometimes, I'll admit, and I answered honestly that I didn't. I was taking time off for health issues. He gets very close-like in my face and whispers something vague about how he has all kinds of work at his house that he needs done, and he's sure he can find something for me to do at his house, and then he tips me a wink. Oh, hell no. I stay cool, and with my smile never faltering, I tell him I'm very lucky that I have a husband who supports me. Luckily, boyfriend picked that exact moment to step around the corner or to peer at the end of the aisle. As a matter of fact, here he comes now. As soon as he heard husband, the little old man's expression instantly changed. He went from friendly, happy-go-smiley grandpa dude to pissed off, scary creeper guy. He disappeared so quickly that I began to suspect he teleported. I never even saw where he went. He was gone that fast. I would have written it off as just a poor elderly gentleman who'd maybe gotten a bit confused until I saw that wink. It was further cemented by the instant change in his expression. He was not confused, it was definitely an act. I've been hit on by men of inappropriate age before and laughed it off. This wasn't that. This was straight up creepy, and I shudder to think what he had in mind with me. I work 12-hour shifts at work, and often get a little impatient on my drives home, which, having a 35 to 45 minute commute, I'm rushing to get back to my dog and still have enough time to sleep before my next shift. This evening I was pulling into my neighborhood behind another car and noticed they were going 5 under the speed limit. I decided to go ahead and pass them since my house was just right up the road and we have a lot of street parking, so I figured they might be going slow to stop and park. I speed up to maybe slightly above the speed limit to get around the car, and immediately it starts trying to play chicken with me and cut me off, which to my knowledge is illegal. I eventually just do a little maneuver and get around and slow back down closer to the limit. From this point, the car starts tailing mine, but I figured he was probably just annoyed and would get over it and move on, after I turn onto my street or he turns onto his. Little did I know that he had other plans. I get this horrible sinking feeling in my stomach and notice that he's decided to turn onto my street with me. I know all the rules of driving. If you're followed, call the cops, but I was hoping maybe he just lived on my street, and there was really nowhere to go from where I was without the potential for him blocking me in somewhere. and my gut feeling was to get somewhere safe ASAP. So I just pull into the driveway. He immediately pulls in behind me and gets out to walk towards me. I'm a single girl living with other girls and 2 small dogs, so I know I'm basically a walking target in terms of safety concerns, and I always keep a 3-inch knife in my car. Nothing too protective, but it makes me feel safe enough. I go ahead and grab it, and get out and decide to try and defuse the situation by asking him to leave. Instead, he crosses his arms and asks me, "Why am I in such a hurry?" I'm not super familiar with self-defense laws, but I didn't want to actually open the knife and risk getting in trouble for threatening someone, and decided to inform him he needs to leave immediately and that I have a knife, in case he wanted to try something. I wanted to be clear he was trespassing and that I was armed. We have a few minutes of back and forth, where he is yelling and getting close and threatening, and I'm trying to keep my act together and stay calm, while telling him to get away from me and my home, and backing slowly towards the house, where I noticed my roommate is home. I pulled the knife out into view, and he backed away a bit, deciding to get into his car at that point. He starts yelling out his street numbers as he takes off and tells me to come to his street. Needless to say, I was extremely shaken up and did end up having the police and neighborhood security take out a report and have our neighborhood mention it for the evening. Now all that's left to do is have a beer and sleep with one eye open. I'm a waitress at a pretty small village pub. It's pretty chill, and we usually don't get a lot of customers, so I'm the only server and bartender. The only real busy day is Sunday around noon, so my boss always stays to help me with the lunch rush. Last Sunday was pretty calm and manageable. I was taking care of the customer in the main room and garden, while my boss was taking care of 2 large parties in the separate dining hall, since it's a small village pub in a very rural area. I know almost all of our customers, so that one guy really stood out, because I'd never seen him before. He was probably in his late 40s, smelled terrible, and had extremely greasy hair. He was just standing at the bar drinking beer and talking to a man who is a regular and comes in every day. The weird guy was constantly staring at me with wide eyes, biting his nails, which was already creepy as hell, and I overheard him saying stuff like, "Wow, she's such a doll. I wish I could wear a miniskirt to work." That made me feel pretty uncomfortable, but still, it happens every day since I'm an 18-year-old girl and most of the customers are 40-ish-year-old men. About an hour later, my area was pretty empty, and the creepy guy was the only person left at the bar. He was still staring at me, biting his nails. My boss was standing at the other end of the bar with one of his customers who was paying a pretty large bill, and when the customer opened his wallet, you could see a bunch of €100 notes in there. The creepy guy mumbled something in my direction and I said, "Sorry, what was that?" He was waving me to get closer, so I did when he mumbled very quietly, "Hey, I have a great idea." "What's that?" He nodded towards the customer paying his bill and mumbled, "We could kill this guy, bury his body in the woods, take all the money and run off together." I thought it was some kind of odd joke and awkwardly tried to laugh, but the guy didn't laugh or smile or anything. I just kind of stuttered, "Oh, no, I don't think that's a good idea." He still wasn't smiling or laughing, so I just noped the hell out of there and started to do some work in the back until he left. So creepy guy, who takes things to the next level, I'm not sure if you meant to joke it or not, but let's not meet again. I recently moved into a new city, and I was looking for a house to rent. That day, I had spent the entire afternoon looking for one until I arrived to a private neighborhood. Before entering to the main street, I had to pass through a security checkpoint, so I decided to ask there. I approached the cabin to ask security guy if he knew if there were any houses left to rent, as I stood outside the open door of the cabin. Then, a chubby 60-year-old man greeted me and told me that there weren't. I said thank you and turned around, but then I heard a sudden, "Miss?" "Yes?" "Last night there was a power shutdown and my radio went nuts. I don't know what that time was. You think you can help me change the hour?" I stood silent, still being outside the open door of the cabin, and started thinking. That morning my school had suffered a power breakdown, but it was very far from that neighborhood. It couldn't have been the same shutdown. Besides, the man said the shutdown was last night, not in the morning. I was still silent. I looked at the open door. I had to get in the cabin if I wanted to help that man, and I'm a really short girl, and he could pull me in or pull me through while I was inside. The alarms were going off in my head. "I don't know how to fix a radio." He looked at me confused and then smiled. "Really? Couldn't you check it at least? Move some buttons or something?" I really have no idea. I've never used one in my life," I said while trying to turn around and not give a crap. "Okay, don't worry about it," the man said. I rushed home, still thinking about what had just happened, and started remembering some things. The radio this man had was very old. It didn't have a tiny screen where you could see the time, and it looked like it didn't have wires. It looked like it was operated via battery. The power shutdown wouldn't have affected it. That had been really odd. But the scariest part is that the man looked really nice and was kind to me. I got the chills as I got home. That night I had dinner with a friend who happened to live 3 blocks away from the private neighborhood, and I told her what happened. She looked at me really impressed and told me that I made the right call, because last night there hadn't been a power shutdown in the area. So, weird radio guy, let's not meet again. I work at San Diego International Airport. I fuel aircrafts and do a lot of doubles and overtimes, so most of the time I'm working. This is why this is relevant. I work night shift and live in El Centro, 120 miles away. So when I'm not working, I'm on the road, and I commute a lot. So by now I'm pretty familiar with my route. There is this particular spot where if I need to take a leak, I can exit the freeway and be out of sight from the rest of traffic. This spot is about a half-hour drive up into the mountains. There's nothing around for miles, but a highway patrol or border patrol stationed somewhere in the mountains, since the border is a few miles south. I exited my vehicle, turned the engine off and killed the lights, went on to do my business. When I was done, I thought I heard footsteps nearby, but it was so dark and foggy I could barely make out a figure. But the occasional passerby of a vehicle on the freeway, it's very quiet. I hop in my car, start the engine and switch on the lights, on purposely steering in the direction of the figure. When I did this, it looks like a young girl, dressed in black, with long hair, pushing a stroller in a very short and slow step. She's coming from a rugged small dirt road that I'm pretty sure only border trucks use, since it leads to the mountains from where I am, and I could see the little long road all the way into the mountains where it makes a turn behind a big boulder. I'm about 10 feet away. I lower the window with the intention to ask if it's okay, since it's 1 a.m. and super cold. I'm advancing slowly at this point, and I'm very close and I'm trying to see inside the stroller. I see 2 hands, small, moving just like when a baby is playing with its hands in the air. Here's where the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I hear a grunting, pig-like grunting, coming from the stroller. I look and there's no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. I exclaimed, "Nope," out loud and steered the other way and drove towards the freeway. All of this happened in a span of 20 to 30 seconds. All I know is that I won't be stopping there anymore. I'm a 20-year-old female, and 4 years ago I was a high school senior, working at Chick-fil-A, and I was also ridiculously stupid and naive. So about 4 years ago I started my very first job, and for some reason my last name and first name were on my name tag. I apparently took this guy's order, Scott, and he memorized my name and looked me up on Facebook. I very stupidly added him, because it said he went to my high school at the time. He messages me, and I quickly find out that he has not only graduated high school, but college too. Now at the time, I was like, oh, this isn't weird. But now that I'm actually in college, I find it very strange that a 22-year-old was hitting on a 16-year-old. We were talking and he tries to take me out on a date to an orchestra concert that's over an hour away from where I live. I was at least smart enough to reject this idea. For the next few weeks he keeps messaging me, and I kept replying for a bit, and he started asking personal questions about my age, sexuality and other stuff, but usually our conversations were very platonic. He still always comments on my looks and how attractive he found me. I slowly stopped talking to him and didn't give him another thought. Then my graduation rolls around and he messaged me again, trying to get me to go out with him on a date. But he refuses to tell me where, so obviously I refuse. So then I have completely forgotten about him until now. I currently work in a resource lounge for students in a student center for my college. One day, I was working when an older guy with grayish hair comes up and says he needs some help. I help him and ask him to put it in the computer system, and he tells me it's Scott. My mind started racing, wondering if it really was him. Sure enough, Scott decided to go back to get another bachelor's degree at my college. That's not completely weird, but I found it odd that he chose mine, and he chose to go to the resource center where I worked at, during the hours I work. What a big coincidence. I'm still not convinced it was weird yet. Well, being a college student, I also work at a retail store on the weekends, and I'm pretty much guaranteed to work every Sunday. Well, one Sunday he comes in and just walks around without buying anything, and then makes eye contact with me before walking out. Okay, odd. Next Sunday he comes in and just walks around, doesn't buy anything, looks at me and walks out. Now after a few more times of this, I unfriend him on Facebook and hope everything is just a giant coincidence. But he quickly realizes that I unfriended him and sends me a request again, and then again 2 days later. I finally blocked him, but I think this guy had bad intentions. So Scott, I can't wait for the day we no longer meet. This happened about 2 years ago. I had just started my first year at a junior college. My friend and I shared a night class, and I frequently gave her a ride as she didn't live too far from me. We approached an intersection close to my college's parking lot, and I stopped at the stop sign, looking both ways. I saw a maroon truck in the far distance, like very far away. It is important that I emphasize I had plenty of time to make my turn without putting us in any danger. After making my turn, I checked my rearview mirror. I heard a noise, as if someone had literally floored their gas pedal, and the truck was closing its distance behind me quickly. My friend and I were a little peeved, but the entrance of the parking lot was close, and we figured we'd lose him when we turned into the park. Nope. He followed us into the lot. He even followed me as I circled around. I parked my car, and so did he, and he got out of his truck. He was pretty old, probably in his late 60s or early 70s. He yelled at me to get out of my car, and I stayed put, telling my friend not to leave either. He shouted expletives at us, telling me I cut him off and could have killed him. He told me I shouldn't text and drive, but my phone was tucked away in my book bag. I'm glad I locked my car, because the guy started banging on the window and literally tried opening the door. He got back in his truck and found the school's security police that roamed the campus, honking them down and making them come into the parking lot. My friend and I had since parked in a different spot away from him, but we didn't feel safe enough leaving our car. He sped off after speaking with the police officers. We finally got out of the car, and when he approached us, we explained our side. He told us he could see why we were shaken. According to the officer, he was screaming like an unhinged maniac. He told us to just be careful when driving and let us go on our way. I stand by the fact my turn was safe, but even if I hadn't been, displaying that amount of road rage was completely unnecessary and terrifying. I used to work in Sears when I was 18. I'd been there for maybe a year at that point and had a few creepy customers, but this guy takes the cake. It was casual wear day at work. I wore some black pants and a more revealing white blouse with short sleeves, which exposed some of my tattoos. I only had a Majora's Mask and Triforce tattoo at this point. The creep noticed and stopped me to compliment my tattoos. We both expressed how much we loved the Zelda series. I was stupid and naive, and I wasn't the best at making friends, so I thought this creep was pretty cool. I basically had the mentality that if you liked video games, you couldn't be that bad of a person. I had no idea what neckbeards or nice guys or anything of the sort were at the time, and I had experiences with both. In any case, we exchanged numbers, and I thought it was great I'd made another friend, when his creepy side started coming out. If I didn't message him back fast enough, he would joke that I was busy sleeping around or didn't have time for him, or joke that he could cut himself if I didn't reply. One night he texted me saying he wished he could kill his soon-to-be ex-girlfriend. That freaked me out, so I blocked him immediately. The next day he came to my workplace and demanded that I unblock him and make it up to him or else. I told him no, that I owe him nothing, and he left, and I thought that was it and that we were done. I let my other co-workers know about the situation and told them not to let him near me. He came back, pushed past my co-workers into our back room, where he found me stocking the shoes. He pushed me and demanded again that I make it up to him, or I'll end up just like his ex-girlfriend or worse. I screamed and my co-workers had gotten security. I was in tears as he was dragged away and had to continue working after I settled down. The creep wasn't finished. The Sears I worked at had 2 levels, all the basic Sears stuff upstairs, and downstairs was the mailing and discount items. The bathroom for employees was downstairs. Apparently the creep had gone into the electronics section, which is besides the stairs, and was posing as a customer. He followed me downstairs and into the women's bathroom, where he screamed at me and grabbed me. He held me against the bathroom wall, right before the stool, and started touching me inappropriately and telling me, "This is what I get. It's my fault this happened." And then, to be a good girl and not scream or struggle. Of course, I screamed and struggled, and thank God the male ladies could hear. Security came and got rid of him. We had awful security, and I'm not the first person to have this problem. So creepy guy who followed me into the bathroom, please, let's never meet again. Not to mention the fact that I ended up quitting not long after this incident took place. I'm older now, and have learnt not to be so trusting of others. Life, as I'm glad to say, has gotten plenty better. This happened a few summers ago, as my boyfriend and I were driving home along a remote forest service road in British Columbia, Canada. Returning from a camping trip, we're pretty familiar with the area we're in, having camped there several times before. Typically the only people we've encountered out there, a good 70 kilometers from paved roads, fellow campers in off-road vehicles or logging trucks on the job. This particular day was beautiful, sunny and warm, mid-June. We were bumping down the road at a good clip when we saw a man come out of the bush and begin frantically waving at us. Very odd. We slowed down and came to a stop, with my boyfriend rolling down the window to see what this guy had to say. I was in the passenger seat, and as soon as we slowed down, I picked up a weird vibe. He was wearing a blue plaid construction worker's flannel coat, much too heavy for the warm weather, with khaki pants and work boots, was clean-shaven with messy grey-brown hair, pale skin and large glasses. He was maybe 50 years old, but let me stress how unusual it is to run into someone way out here without a vehicle. This guy was fairly soft-spoken and calmly, almost robotically said to us that his car battery is dead and asked us for a jump. Sure, we believe in road karma and always want to help people out that are in trouble when we're out in the bush. But where's the car? He tells us that he's been fishing all day and had been playing his radio, and it caused his battery to die. His car is down a very overgrown side road a little further up the main road. He walks ahead while we slowly follow behind him in our truck. Both my boyfriend and I are a bit weirded out, and we joke around to each other as we're following him that we hope he's not luring us into the bush to kill us. Except I legit felt on the edge, and this joke didn't seem that funny. We followed him about 150 meters down the overgrown side road into a small, heavily treed area, just wide enough for about 4 cars to park side by side. We never would have noticed this road if it hadn't have been pointed out to us, because bushes had nearly covered the entrance. Sure enough, the car is there, an older model beige Chevy that looks very unsuited for the rough logging roads. The trunk is open for some reason, and a blanket is draped over it. The hood was already popped on the car, so my boyfriend got out, grabbed our jumper cables from the back seat of our truck, and began affixing the cables to the car. Meanwhile, I swung my leg over the center console and slid into the driver's seat. I felt very uneasy and looked around the cab for anything that could be a weapon, all the while telling myself I was being silly. But nonetheless, I wanted to act if something threatening happened. The guy chatted with my boyfriend jovially, telling him about his buddy who he was fishing with, but who went on again without him. His friendliness seemed forced. He stood back, allowing my boyfriend to do everything, lingering behind him watching him while my boyfriend got the car batteries hooked up. There was an awkward pause and my boyfriend had to prompt the guy to get into his car to crank it over. Throughout this, I sat in the driver's seat watching, feeling tense. The car fired up easily, and the guy got back out of his driver's seat, said thank you in an oddly intense way, and my boyfriend removed the cables, hopped into the passenger seat without bothering to put the cables away properly, and the moment the passenger door closed, I was reversing down the narrow side road with branches scraping across both sides of our car. We got on the main road within moments, and were on our way. My boyfriend told me the guy watched us the entire time as we backed down the road. He could have just been a really socially awkward guy with a legitimate dead battery, but I couldn't help but feel that his intentions were more sinister, and the fact that I stayed vigilant in the car and that my boyfriend was officially competent with the jumper cables helped us dodge a bullet. Not sure if the battery really was dead, but neither of us remember seeing any fishing gear. In 2015, I made the move from my town in England to Washington State. I moved to an area that was small enough to not really get any tourists, and it made my accent stand out a lot. I was fairly used to people doing a double take as soon as I opened my mouth, but this time was a little different, and it seriously shook me up. I'm a female, and was 20 at the time. It was around 1 a.m., and I was letting my dogs out before I went to bed. Unfortunately, my wife and I didn't have a fenced yard or even a backyard. Our younger dog has to be taken out on a leash, meaning I had to take them for a super small walk. I open the door and Bailey, the older dog, goes plodding off. Gremlin tugging on her leash. Hold on, I say to her, laughing. I walk down the steps and take them to the side of the house to our front yard. A gentleman turns the corner and stops. Your dogs are lovely. I turn to look at him and smile. Thank you so much. He does the double take and comes closer to me. I love your accent. Are you Australian? I laugh and explain that I'm English, while Gremlin comes over to him for some attention. What's your favorite kind of dog? Pugs, I tell him enthusiastically. I love them. The guy stands up. This is where it gets creepy. I have a pug. I react happily, asking the usual dog questions when he suddenly steps even closer right into my personal space. You should come meet my dog. He's staring at me intently, and now I'm pretty uncomfortable. I politely decline, saying I was about to head to bed, and moving on to our little yard and closer to the property. The man follows me, keeping the uncomfortable closeness. I only live up the street. Come meet my pug. Again, I decline, to which I start to walk into the house. There's a part of me that doesn't want to open the door, in fear that he pushes his way in. However, I don't manage to get to the front door. He corners me against the side of my house, grabbing my arm. Come with me. It's not a question. We won't be long. My heart is racing, and I could already tell I'm going to have bruises from his tight grip. The man now tries to pull me, but I plant my feet firmly. No, please get off my property and let me go. I will shout so my boyfriend will come running. So cliche, but I don't know what else to do. It doesn't work. He pulls harder, actually making me move a few steps forward. Come with me now. No, I say loudly, despite knowing no one will come hear me as my wife works night shift. That's when Bailey, my wife's 10-year-old Cocker Spaniel, jumps off the porch where he had been patiently laying, waiting to be let back in. Never before have I heard her growl, but that night I did. Bailey bares her teeth, snarling at the man, shoveling her way between us. Gremlin picks up on Bailey's attitude and joins him by yapping at the man. He lets me go and takes a few steps back with shake obviously written on his face. Bailey, get him! I say it like it's a command she might recognize, when really I might as well be telling her to read the paper. The fake command works, however, and the man takes off running. I bend down in tears and wrap my arms around Bailey, her little stump tail wagging madly as she looks at me for confirmation she did good. We head to the front door pretty quickly, and I double-check that every door and window is locked before curling up with the dogs, treat bag in hand. So creepy stranger who wants me to meet his pugs? Let's not meet again. This happened back in March. My sister and I were heading to an airport for our 6 a.m. flight to Orlando, Florida, to visit Universal Studios. This incident happened between 3 to 3:30 a.m. We're driving along the interstate when we come up behind a semi-truck. The semi is keeping up with traffic, so my sister decides to not pass him, knowing that I really hate being next to big trucks because I'm scared of them. My family has a few close calls with them, but I've personally known people who've lost loved ones in horrific accidents involving trucks. For a while, being behind this truck was fine. Like I said, I was keeping up with the flow of traffic and being fine. But then about 20 minutes in, the driver starts doing a few bizarre things. The truck will start to brake, or it starts to swerve into the next lane. There is literally nothing in front of the truck, nor is it stormy. It was a cloudy night, but not windy. We weren't following the truck very close, but after that, my sister backs off even more. Soon enough, we're away from the rest of the traffic, and it's just us and the truck. It's still randomly hitting the brakes when it suddenly swerves off the lane and hits the rumble stripes. And I'm finally like, will you just pass the truck? He's being really weird. My sister agrees with me and starts gaining speed to get around this truck promptly. As she signals and switches lanes, the truck speeds up a little. My sister doesn't let that deter her and hits the gas. When we get up next to the cab, the driver lays on his horn, starts flashing his high beams and speeds up even more, and starts to swerve over into our lane. My sister floors it and manages to pull her car in front, though we were forced onto the rumble stripes to avoid being sideswiped by the truck. She keeps going fast, and when we get a good distance in front of it, she speeds back over and starts to slow down a bit. But then she's just like, seriously, what is his problem? I look in the side mirror and it's hauling ass trying to catch up with us. My sister speeds up again and is pushing past 85 miles an hour when we're able to start pulling away from the truck. We eventually catch up to traffic that had left us behind with the truck. From then, we were able to slow down a little more, but with that truck gaining on us again. We passed through them, and when the truck caught up with the traffic, he slowed way down, and we were able to lose him. I've told this story to a few people, and they're always like, oh, sounds like road rage. But I honestly don't know what my sister and I did to piss this guy off. But I do know that this trucker made my paranoia around semi-trucks even worse. I am a 31-year-old female, and this happened to me 4 years ago. I was working register at a dollar store at the time. I had a steady flow of customers, so I was fairly busy. One customer stepped up to the register and wanted to look at a portable AM/FM radio that was behind the counter. He was in his 20s, maybe early 30s. Hard to tell because he was so rough looking. He had a tattoo on each cheek, and he was acting really weird and obviously high. He wanted to see what kind of batteries it took, so he opened the package, and he couldn't get the battery cover off because he would need a screwdriver. So he starts banging the thing on the counter and breaks the battery cover off. He asks me to help him figure out which batteries he needed. Meanwhile, I have a line building up and can see the customer behind him looks nervous. I was very calm and patient with him because he made me nervous too. I think that might have been what could have saved me from possibly ending up a victim myself. He eventually paid for the radio and left, after me taping the back of it back on for him. After he left, me and the next customer spoke about how uncomfortable the guy made us, and that was the last time I saw him, in person anyway. The next time I saw him was on Facebook on a link to a news article. I can't remember if it was the same day I saw him or the following one, but I saw his unmistakable face on the mugshots. He robbed and shot a local pizza delivery guy to death and then called 911 and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. I honestly feel like if I had reacted or treated him differently, or if there weren't so many customers in my store at the time, I could have been a potential victim. He was so nervous and he was trying to storm my register, which he did for about 15 minutes. I think he got spooked and changed his mind on robbing me. I have 3 children. My middle child, my son, is the sweetest thing. He is compassionate and emphatic, which at his age of 3 is rare. When we go out in public, people take notice, especially if it's just him and I. He will talk your head off and has impeccable manners. It was during a last-minute shopping trip this takes place. One child was in school, the other was with my mum. so he and I had some alone time. I always treasure these trips because I get to experience his beautiful personality unfiltered. We go to the store and get what we need of the food section, then head to the toiletries. He is happy talking away, mostly about things relevant to him in his 3-year-old mind, telling me he's a superhero having to save a princess, asking to pick up something special for his brother and sister. All around, a cute kid. We go down the oral hygiene aisle and pick up some toothpaste. As we're leaving the aisle, I notice a man and a woman together. I'm assuming they're married. The woman continues on the aisle, where the man just stops to where my son and I are and just stares. I figured he was listening to our conversation, as most people do. But seriously, this kid talks a lot. It didn't freak me out, but just made me more alert. So this guy, without prompting, says, "He's cute. Can I have him?" I was weirded out, but say, "Ha, no, I love my boy. I think I'll keep him." Well, that's too bad. I'm thinking that's going to be the end of our exchange, and I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he's joking, and didn't realize he was being creepy. At this point, my son sees a Batman toothbrush he must have, and I explain to him, yes, it might be the most amazing toothbrush ever, but I just don't have the money to buy another one right now. Being 3, he was obviously upset. End of the world type stuff. So the man completely bypasses me and comes up to my son. "What about this one? Do you like this one? If you lived with me, I'd get it for you." Now I'm completely freaking out. Who ignores the mother to talk to the child, offering him something he can't have? What did he expect? My son to say in front of me that he wants to go with the man, and I just let him? It was super weird. Him coming at my son like that? I gave him the full effect of, "Touch my kid, and I will make your face bleed." He sort of backs off, but doesn't go to join his wife. I'm super cautious when it comes to my kids, because my aunt was murdered by a serial killer. It has left this aura of fear, despair, and paranoia in my family, making something big out of something small. But I knew this was big. At this point, I'm like, screw it, and noped out of there. This guy very cautiously starts to follow us, going into an aisle when we're heading out. He was trying very hard to be nonchalant, staying a good ways behind us, so as to not arouse suspicion. But being hyper-aware for the reasons I just said, I took notice. I go down aisles I had already been down and then go again. He followed us everywhere. What was he trying to do? Kidnap my kid in the middle of a crowded supermarket? After this dance of ours, I decided to head to the bathroom and hide out for a while. What do you know? He heads to the men's room. I get into the restroom and block the door with my body, meaning someone would have to knock before coming in. I figured if he tried to force his way in, I'd have a head start. I decided if he was still there when we got out, I would alert security. I could have handled him if he decided to make his move, since I practice Muay Thai, but I really try not to use it if I can help it, because it can be a brutal art form. My son and I chill out in the bathroom for 45 minutes. I give him my phone to play around with, thinking of what my next move is, and all these horrible things this guy could have planned for my son. All the while, trying to imagine this guy's endgame. Abduct him in broad daylight? He would have to have known he'd get caught, because I'd make a huge fuss. Anyway, it ends anticlimactically, because when we left, the guy was gone. I just think how lucky we are that nothing happened, and that this guy wasn't more patient. I have no doubt in my mind he would have done something sinister after following us about and clearly being desperate for my kid. I've had my license for about a week, and I took full advantage of it and drove down to see some friends. My friends and I drove to my girlfriend's house, and he had a curfew. So we left her house and got up by where we were supposed to turn to get there. I was in the wrong lane and trying to get over, and then there were two trucks that wouldn't let me pass. So we sped past them. No problem, right? Well, my dumbass got in front of this guy and he slowed down. Huge mistake. This freak, who was pulling a trailer and hauling a car, sped up and passed me and almost ran us off the road. I look over, and I'm not even exaggerating. He was hanging halfway out of his window, flipping me off and screaming at us. We got up to a red arrow, because of course we did, and when we were turning, this madman curbs his truck on the crosswalk, where you would push the button to change the lights, and gets out of his truck, screaming at the top of his lungs for us to get out the car, and walks towards us, then slightly turns back and gets something out of the back. Was it a gun? Was it a weapon? I don't know, and we sure as hell didn't stick around to find out. We were both so terrified that we didn't call the cops. But if you're hearing this somehow, and you saw that we were kids and didn't stop, you would have stomped the crap out of two kids. I'm still kind of anxious to drive in that part of town. Rewind to early 2000s. I'm a junior in high school working my first job at a pizza place in a small one-horse town. My best friend, called Holly, lives right down the road from where I work and a few blocks away from our school. So I was over all the time at her parents' and we were totally cool. She has a weird older brother I didn't really care for and had a best friend called Michael. This friend Michael I'd met a few times in passing. They were always outside working on cars when I saw them at the house. It was always your typical teenage exchange. No flirting that I noticed, but I wasn't into either of them, so I wasn't giving them much attention. One day Michael breaks his leg, and apparently this kid had a bad home life or such, and Holly's parents offered up their house for his recovery, even though they were all going on vacation and no one would be there to help care for him. So Holly's mum, knowing I work a block away, asks if I can swing by after work to check on him. I was willing to do a favor for her and agreed, even though I knew I'd be dead by then. After a Saturday night of serving endless pies and Rockefeller oysters to a small town mix of Sons of Anarchy wannabes and 50-year-old sun-bleached alcos that talk way too close to your face. Fast forward to 2:15. I'm real tired, but on my way to Holly's to check on the guy. I don't really know at all. I come in and he's all set up on the couch watching TV. We greet each other and it's all smiles while we small talk for a bit, and then I ask him if he needs anything. He asked me to bring him a few things from the kitchen. Food, water, whatever it was, and I made the mistake of sitting down in a chair and found myself unable to get up. I was so tired, I texted Holly and told her I was going to crash in her bed. I knew she wouldn't mind, and I'm pretty sure she had offered it to me beforehand anyway. He's chatting me up on the couch the whole time, and we're both kind of absently watching TV while I muster the energy to move. I get up, tell him I'm actually going to crash in Holly's room, and I'll see him in the morning to get him anything if he needs it before I go home. I go in, close the door, kick off my shoes, and just lay down on the top of her twin bed in all my clothes and passed out pretty quickly. What I wake up to about an hour later is a sort of jiggling around my waist. Also, out of my periphery, I see a dark figure crouching next to the side of my bed. I'm slowly waking up more each second, but I was pretty out of it. At first, I jolted upright and sort of panicked. I genuinely thought something was wrong for a minute. You know, for him to be in the room I was sleeping in. I said, "What's wrong?" As soon as I spoke, he shuffled around a lot because, guys, he's on crutches. He struggles to get back on and quickly leaves while muttering something along the lines of, everything's okay. I laid there propped upright, watching him as he shuffled out and closed the door behind him. As he did this, I came to the reality out of my sleeping fog. Wait, why was he in here? And was he just fumbling with my belt? I looked down. Sure enough, he had started to unfasten it. He must have been stealthily working on it for a few minutes for me to not wake up immediately. That's when the fear crept in. I checked the time, 4 a.m. Way too late to go to my parents. My parents had just gotten divorced, and if I showed up in the middle of the night, my dad would think I was out partying. It was a sore subject at the time, and I didn't want any more drama with them. I knew I wouldn't be able to convince him otherwise after I told him I was staying at Holly's, and didn't bother telling him about the whole Michael thing anyway. So in my eyes, I had nowhere to go. I began to doubt the whole thing. This couldn't be happening to me. And I thought since he'd been caught, he wouldn't dare try it again. So I just lay there for a few hours, go home a decent hour, and this nightmare would be over. Well, that's what I thought. I fall asleep again. I know, but I was scared and tired at 5 a.m. Take 2, to his shadow crouched near me once more. He's tugging even harder at my belt, and was more determined this time. I jolt up, backed against the wall, and didn't say a word. He just did this whole shuffle of picking up his freaking crutches and quickly shuffling out. No words exchanged. I think I was in shock. The fact that someone was just helping themselves to my sleeping body was one thing, but that he must have sat there contemplating it for a while and finally pulled up his crippled self from the bedrest and hovelled in there so quietly and thought he might get away with it. I was there to help out that arsehat and decided I had to get the hell out of there. So I crawled out of Holly's window and got into my car ASAP. I still felt I couldn't go home at 5 a.m. though, so I just parked by a close church in my back seat with the doors locked. The next day, I told Holly about it, and she told me that she would catch both Michael and her brother sneaking into her room at night and peeking in on her, changing and other pervy stuff. Sometimes I wonder if it took her this long to tell me that's what they've done. I wonder what she hasn't told me about. I didn't mention it to the parents or anything. Teenage girls don't tend to understand just how violated they were in certain situations and shake it off. So naive. I don't go over there often anymore, and never when I know her brother's home. We're still friends though. But to creepy Michael, let's not meet again, or I'll break your other leg. I was working in a convenience store. 19 years old, single mum. Luckily, this day I wasn't alone. This guy came in and walked around and then went back to pump his gas, then drove off without paying. I got the tag number, called the police per policy, and didn't expect anything to come from it because that's what always happened. Gas theft just wasn't a priority to the police department. To my surprise, less than an hour later, an officer walks in and asks me to identify the guy, which I did. I didn't really think too much of it. I was just content that they caught the guy, and went on about my business, went home and got on with life. The next day, the manager calls me early and tells me that she saw the guy who I had identified on the news. He was wanted for 2 counts of murder. He had murdered a female jogger with no apparent motive, and a convenience store clerk that he had kidnapped after robbing her. I assumed he was mistaken because that just seemed too crazy. Me helping catch a murderer seemed unlikely. Later that day, the officer came by and told me it was true and thanked me. Without the tag number, they may not have caught him until he had hurt more women. She also told me that the reason the police caught him quickly was the car was stolen. Then the officer told me the scariest part of all. Coming in and walking around the store is exactly the same thing he did before the robbery and kidnapping of the second victim. I will never know exactly why he didn't rob me or worse. I assume it was because my manager was there, which was unusual. I'm just grateful for whatever it was. This was early in 2003 in a small city in the south. In any case, I'm glad I'm just around to tell the tale and to inform you that he got the death penalty. About 19 years ago, I had a frightening incident while driving home from work in the evening. I was driving down a narrow one-way street with tall, sharp speed bumps when I see in my rearview mirror a rumpled and unshaven-looking driver who looked to be in his late 40s in a gold minivan coming up quick to my rear bumper. He stays barely a foot behind my car, squealing his brakes and nearly rear-ending me several times. He starts to honk his horn in long, angry blasts and yells at me out of his window. I sped up a bit and didn't want to break an axle or suspension on my old compact Toyota, trying to please this aggressive dude. At the end of the street, I turned onto this larger boulevard, thinking that there would be at the end of it. He follows me. My heart starts to pound. After about half a mile and a few left, and right turns, he's still behind me. I pull over into a space on a side street, and he follows and pulls up and parks right behind me, confirming he is definitely tailing me. He opens his door and steps out to approach my car, his face in a snarl of anger. I quickly pulled out of the parking space. He shouts an obscenity, jumps back into his van and starts tailing me again. This guy clearly has bad intentions. He continues to trail me for another half a mile on several streets, when I realize I'm getting close to my home street. I eventually turn into the alley that adjoins my gated parking lot, the kind where you have to use a remote control to open the gate. The gate opens. I pull into my lot, and he starts to follow me into the alley. Is he actually going to follow me in? Does he realize he won't be able to get out without a remote to open the gate? He's not quite quick enough. The gate starts to slide shut behind me before he can squeeze in. I can see his livid face in my rearview mirror, screaming something inside his van. I'm afraid to exit my car, worried that another user might open the gate again, allowing him to drive or walk into the lot. There was also a pedestrian entrance to the lot off the main street, but it required a key. He continued to block off the alley for about 5 minutes, until another car drives up and honks their horn for him to get out the way. He eventually backs out and drives off. My heart finally slowed down. This was before I knew where the closest police stations or fire stations were, and before anyone had a cell phone. I didn't report the incident when I got home because I had been too flustered to take down his number plate. Frankly, the police most likely wouldn't have done anything anyway. Road rage guy, let's not meet again. When I was 19, I was still living on the family ranch deep in the Texas brush country. My father had hired some men as extra hands, and they stayed in the little travel trailer near the main house. One night when everyone had gone out, I stayed home alone. Earlier, one of the men, a younger guy in his 20s, had tried to talk to me and flirt. I had no interest. I had a boyfriend at the time and ignored him. So jump to later that night, home alone. I find this guy at my living room window looking in at me. I was watching TV when I heard weird noises outside the window. We didn't have air conditioning. Summer nights are very cool, so we always had our windows open. I turned to look out the window and when my eyes finally focus, I see that guy there. His face pressed against the window screen, making kissy lips, and by the obvious movement of his shoulder and breathing heavily, he was jacking off. I was freaking out. There was no one home. I run to the kitchen and grab a knife, and back to the window. But he's gone. A very long hour later, my folks show up, and I tell them everything. My father obviously is livid, goes to where they're staying, but the guy isn't there. The others say they hadn't seen him since earlier. We all calm down and figure he left on his own. My father has told the rest of them they will be leaving as well in the morning, and we all go to bed. In my room, I'm laying on my bed, which was just my queen mattress on my floor, a trend I was trying out, and it was right under the window. As I'm laying there trying to sleep, I hear this man's voice. "Hey, sweetie." And it was that guy at my window, trying to get in. I scream my lungs out. Both parents come running in. I'm sobbing hysterically, pointing to the window. With the lights on, you could see he had already torn the corner of the screen. My father runs out the house in his underwear, catches up with the guy trying to run, and beats the ever-loving crap out of him. We went to the trailer and started beating the crap out of the men there. They're obviously scared. They didn't really know what was happening. Then my dad goes into the house and grabs his firearm. It was a big one, and he stands there in the doorway of the travel trailer making sure everyone gets their stuff and leaves. Before they go, he pulls one aside and whispers in his ear. The man nods and writes something down on a piece of paper. It was a phone number, because that morning I heard my dad yelling into the phone about what happened and how it will never happen again, and the only reason he didn't kill the guy was because he didn't feel like digging a hole. For clarity, the men were illegal aliens, which my father always hired to help on the ranch. We live in South Texas, 4 hours from Mexico. My dad never had problems with them before, and I had grown up around them all my life. My father was also what is known as a coyote. He'd pick up or run the men to their next stop for a little bit amount of money, and was a well-known place to rest, work, and be transported to the next destination, usually Houston. So that leads up to my next point. It wasn't unusual to get randoms just showing up. Not long ago, I was on my way to work. I was exiting the freeway, and the exit lane merges into the feeder, or whatever. I'm starting to merge, and in my rearview mirror, I see a truck coming up fast in the far lane. It was another car in that same lane just ahead of him. This jackass pumps from behind this car and into the lane that I was merging in, and he almost rear-ends me while I was merging. He lays on the horn, then rolls beside me at the stoplight a little later and starts cursing at me, calling me all kinds of names. It's about 4 in the morning. I'm heading to work and thinking it's early for this, and just look forward to not paying him any mind. I see his door open, and this little 5'0" chubby male guy jumps out. I'm 6 foot, 215 pounds, and in my late 20s. I lift weights at least 3 times a week. And he comes up to my passenger window, talking about how he wants to fight and to get out, spitting at my truck. I'm guessing he thought I was scared of him because I wouldn't look his way. I'm very nice and calm, and it takes a lot to get me out to that point of crazy. I'm thinking this guy has serious road rage. Plus, it's Houston, Texas, where guns are an everyday thing down here. So by this time I started yelling and cursing back at him. I have a very deep voice, and I see it kind of spooked him once I started talking, and then I had to get out my truck. By the time the lights turn green, I'm stepping out, and he gets back in his truck and drives off, yelling something. I think he called me the M word. Idiot. I was working at a fabric and craft store when I encountered a neckbeard. The first time we met, he was needing help getting something off a shelf and wandered to my side of the store, the fabric side. Of course, I go and help him, and it's customary to ask, "What are you working on?" He tells me he makes what I can only describe as nerd stuff and sells at conventions. I tell him that's super cool and that I'm a cosplayer myself and have attended many conventions. He thanks me and goes on his way. The next week he shows up on the same day and comes right over to me. We aren't busy, so we strike up a conversation about cosplaying, and he asks if I could help him with one he wanted to work on. I ask to see a picture, and it's essentially a muscle suit with a loincloth. Immediately after showing me, he jumps into, "I can't pull it off though, I'm too fat to pull it off." And of course I start telling him how cosplay is for everyone, and he can wear whatever he wants. He asks again if I can help him sometime with it, and that he would pay me a lot of money to do so. I decline, but he scribbles down his number in case I change my mind. I threw it away. The next day he comes in again. This time we're busy, and he makes a beeline right for me, and I was putting fabric away in the back corner of the store, and instantly starts berating me. "Why didn't you call me? I gave you my number so you could call me. I told you I would give you a lot of money." I quickly look around. There's no one. Just me, a 5'2" person, and a neckbeard who's a very big guy. I started to tell him I needed to go back to the counter, and he's stopping me and backing me further into the corner. I have no idea what to do now, or how to flag down anyone. Then I remember the headset we all wear, and just pushed the talk button, and between him yelling and me I could say things like, "Sir, I really need to get out of the fleece section and go back to the counter." Soon an employee came up and saw what was going on and said, "Hey, it's time for your break, hurry up," and she grabbed my arm and whisked me away. I had to write up an incident report with my manager, who decided not to ban the guy from the store. So instead, whenever he came in, people would use a code over the headset to let me know to go sit in the back until he left. I worked for a while, until one day we were really busy. I was a manager myself now, and I was running the register. I didn't look up and just called the next person. That's when I heard, "Wow, haven't seen you in a while." And I looked up and saw it was Neckbeard. I put on my best fake smile and said, "Oh, my schedule's changed a lot. I work another job now." He asked me where, and I told him in the strip mall. Of course I wasn't going to tell him the actual place. I thought it was over until right before he left. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Well, when you're off tonight, you should give me a call." I had to be walked to my car after my shift, and I switched to overnight, so I never saw him again. I still live in fear I'll see him at a convention sometime, and worry what I'll do if that happens. The year is 2002. It's late at night, and I'm driving to my parents' house that's some way outside the city, basically in the middle of nowhere. A truck cuts me off at an intersection on my way to the highway. I had right of way and would have plowed straight into the truck if I hadn't slammed on the brakes. I honk the horn at him and give him the middle finger, which I doubt he sees, and pass him as we get onto the highway. A while later, I turn off the highway and notice that the same truck turns the same way. The roads are smaller and it's dark, so I'm driving at the speed limit and the truck catches up to me. He's getting uncomfortably close, and even though I start speeding up, he just gets closer and closer. When the truck is about 3 feet from my rear bumper, I accelerate as fast as I can, and he gets a couple of 100 yards between us, so I can quickly turn to the next intersection. He follows. I hit the accelerator and turn again. When the next intersection comes along, So I'm racing down these country roads that are barely wide enough for the truck, and this arsehole is keeping up. My heart is pounding like crazy, but I also know the area and the roads, and was about to get into roads that run through the woods. I turn off my headlights, drive like a maniac, and manage to turn into an even smaller road, which I doubt he could have seen me doing. I can't keep driving because I know the road just goes into a cabin and ends there, so I come to a stop a bit down the road and on the side so that the trees will cover me, and turn my engine off, then wait. After a while I can see his headlights on the road I turned off from. He's driving slower now. He stops at the intersection and shines a flashlight down the road where I am. He's looking at my direction for what feels like minutes. I hope the flashlight can't reach all the way to where my car is. Finally, he drives away. I waited for 5 more minutes and then head back to the main road and continue to my parents' house. My fiancé and I were camping, as we'd done many times at this particular state park. Everything was normal. Made some dinner on the fire, stayed up a bit, then let the fire die down and went into the tent to smoke a blunt of some diesel devil's lettuce and get some rest. Despite having read 100,000 of these Reddit stories, the woods never scared me. This night my brain decided that a reoccurring nightmare about someone walking around our tent would be a good idea. So I'm going through the cycle of dreaming that, and I've woken up to footsteps around my tent and trying to wake up my fiancé. I fail. I dream it again and eventually wake up completely to realize there's nothing there. 3 or 4 rounds into this mess, I'm waking up to these footsteps. This time I realize I'm not dreaming. There's definitely someone out there. Then I hear a deep, low, throaty growl, and I'm nearly petrified. I manage to reach over and wake my fiancé while whispering quietly, "There's something outside our tent." He wakes up, and we continue to hear something walking around, growling and snarling. We're basically wetting ourselves. We can't decide if it's something big because of the vocalizations. It sounds like it, but I'm hoping these steps are being amplified, as they generally are in the woods. And maybe this just really is 3 aggressive squirrels in a trench coat. We're trying to peek out but can't see anything. The noises move to the edge of the site and there's a lot of snarling and animals screaming. Then silence. Then it's on the other side of the tent. This is making it really hard to decide what to do. We're trying to be silent while gathering what feeble little weapons we have. Me and my pink canister of saber pepper gel, which is obviously just going to anger the 3,000-pound prehistoric mountain lion that I'm imagining is preparing to devour my soul. With him, a few hunting knives we brought to cut bits of rope and carry in case of emergency. We don't even have the hatchet because I let him pack it while at work, which means we had 85% of the important things we needed. There's some screaming going along the edge of the site now. It sounds like every animal in the northeast of the United States is being skinned alive around our tent. I'm shaking like a leaf, and I had to stand because the adrenaline pumping felt like I smoked a Bobby Brown's lifetime worth of crack. We still cannot pinpoint where this thing is, what it is, or catch any glimpses from our tent. We're definitely going to die in the woods here. It's late in the season, and there's maybe one other occupied site. And we showed up too late to check in, so no doubt we're about to become a couple of unidentifiable mystery moles, and I'm losing my mind. Finally, it's been a few minutes since we heard any shrieking. Last we heard, this thing sounded like a few sites away. So we decide we're going to grab our wallets and run. I don't care how many paychecks worth of gear we have, we're going to hit the car and the panic button. Presumably, this nature beast is crapping itself in the woods, because bright lights, loud sounds, it works, and we zoom the hell out. It's like 2 a.m, we get some Slim Jims at a convenience store and go home for the night, and then gear up in the morning with some high-powered CO2 weapons, hatchets, knives, you name it, and return. We didn't find anything. We made friends with a troop of trashy trash pandas for the rest of the trip, and kind of always wondered if, perhaps it was just them in a trench coat terrorizing us that night. I guess we'll never know. I'm not a good driver by any stretch of the imagination. At the best of times, I'm passable. Keep this in mind. My best friend and I were driving home through an industrial section of our town. Not to say it was a bad area, just a little rundown. I was in the left lane of a 4-lane road, but there was a good deal of traffic in that lane. I tried to move into the right lane, but little did I know that there was someone a few cars behind me moving into my lane at the same time. She accelerated super quickly, and we almost hit each other, but I let her go ahead of me. I will say that it was probably more my fault than hers, but her reaction is what was total overkill. After laying on the horn of her car, she starts periodically slamming on her brakes in front of me. We approach a left lane, and since that's where I was heading, that's where I signaled to go. We were at a standstill at this red light, and as soon as she does that, I start freaking out a little bit. So I stopped with a good distance between her car and mine. I see her passenger door open, and this woman started charging towards my car on foot, abandoning her car across 2 lanes of traffic. I still had no idea what she was planning to do once she got out. But about 2 weeks earlier, some girl in my area was shot and killed in a road rage accident. I was taking 0 chances. I flung my car into reverse and decided I was now taking a right turn at this light, regardless of where it led. I thought that was the end of everything, but I was wrong. She got back in her car as quickly as possible and started following me. I made turn after turn trying to lose this woman while she followed, trying to swerve and ram into the back of my car. My best friend was in the passenger seat, screaming and calling every person we know, trying to figure out what to do. After a few miles, this woman tried hitting us. I ran a red light and we finally lost her. We got on the interstate as quickly as possible, but flinched at every black car we saw behind us for a good half hour. Should we have called the cops? Maybe. Did we think of that in the heat of the moment? Sadly not. So to the lady who tried to fight 2 17-year-old girls at a red light, let's not meet. I'm 30 years old, and I've worked as a special education teacher in an elementary school. I've been there about 10 years and have always gotten along with my co-workers, save a few minor incidents of course. I am a very friendly person at work. I try to participate in all social events and be friendly to all the new workers we get. That's why I was so kind to Mohammed. Mohammed was 24 and moved here to North America from the Middle East about 2 to 3 years ago. He claimed to be a psychologist, but was now working in my field. Whether or not he is one, I don't know. So for the last year and a bit, we had been friendly. However, in the last few months, Mohammed became very clingy, constantly asking questions about my boyfriend, complimenting me, texting me, and updating me about his everyday. Out of respect for my boyfriend, who he knew about and would constantly bring up in conversation, and my general disinterest in him when I started putting distance between us, telling him I didn't like compliments when he would endlessly compliment me. Less talking, not texting him back, etc. On the week before our spring vacation, he took it another level, making comments that my boyfriend doesn't love me because he took more than a minute to reply, saying I should join him on a vacation to Miami, just the 2 of us, blowing up my phone to the point I had to block him. All of this I could handle, until the day he really pushed me. By following me at the heels all day, when I wasn't in his line of sight, He would demand loudly where I'd gone, screaming my name out when he saw me walking in the opposite direction to ask where I was going. I have panic disorder as well as bad anxiety. As this continued throughout the day, with a few people questioning his behavior, I began to feel a panic attack coming on. So I asked to leave early. He spent the whole week we're on vacation constantly messaging and calling me from different numbers. I blocked them all as they came in, and since our return I haven't even said a word to him. It's been roughly 3 weeks. Now he just complains to everyone how horribly I treated him and stares at me whenever I'm in his line of sight. I don't know if I overreacted or not, but at this point I don't care what my co-workers think of me. Mohammed, you were a good friend, but you're being a creep now, and I don't want to meet again. My mum was dating my dad at the time, and I was about 10. He lived with his parents at the time since his dad was sick, and since it wasn't really that far from our house, we decided to visit him there. We had dinner, stayed for a while, and he gave us gifts. He gave me a cow plushie that I still have to this day. Everything goes well, then it gets late, around 11 p.m, and we know it's time to leave. It's literally pitch black. It's probably mid-December, with no snow falling at the moment, but it's icy, and you couldn't see your hands in front of your face. So like any normal human being would, my mum puts on her high beams. Something I forgot to add is that she would actually shut them off when she got close to another car. It's not like she was blinding them. She only had them on when she was facing behind a car. You'll understand why momentarily. We get behind this black car, in which the driver is acting like a jerk and won't drive like any normal individual. They're speeding up to almost 70 and then slowing down to almost a stop. My mum can't turn because the road is rural and there's nothing but cow fields on either side. There was nowhere to go, and we end up behind him with an extremely aggravated driver behind us. It gets a bit harder to see again, so my mum puts on her high beams, a fair distance away from the black car, because why wouldn't you when you are far away? But of course the driver stopped in front of us, completely. Then this huge, burly, big-built man starts springing over to our car at full speed. I start screaming and crying and see that he's holding a blunt object in his hand. My mum recoils as she fears for the worst as she looks around, trying to figure out how she could escape. There's a car coming from the other way, so she can't turn around. His car is in front of us, so she can't hit the gas. There are only fenced-off fields around us. He pounds on the windows like the FBI and starts screaming and swearing at us. He threatens us, saying that he'd kill my mum if he ever caught her with her high beams on again. Of course, I start to scream and cry, being a small, skinny 10-year-old girl and not knowing if me or my mum are about to be finished. Also knowing full well, if she did, I wouldn't know what to do or how to get home. I didn't have my dad's phone number memorized at the time, and I didn't exactly remember how to work my mum's phone, so I didn't know how to call my dad. The man's body language was just off. I'm not sure if he was drunk or high, but it seemed that way. He looked at me for a second, which scared my mum, and my mum is also a small lady. Our car won't go fast, and she wasn't sure what to do because neither fight nor flight would work. The blunt object in his hand turned out to be a huge flashlight, which he began to hit the window with. He also started flashing the light in my mum's face to blind her. How ironic. My mum yelled at him to get lost and he hit the window harder, about to break it. Thankfully, the car behind us started to lay on the horn, and he got back into his car out of fear and sped off. My mum called my dad, who drove around almost all night to look for the guy, but didn't find anything. I don't remember if we called the police or not. I remember just crying into my pillow. So Road Rage Man, let's never ever meet again.